Welcome back to Semanglish, which is English, but all the words are descended from a synonym in Proto-Indo-European. We're going to finish off all the nouns from the Swadesh list, a list of common vocabulary that even ancient languages would have words for, mostly organs and natural categories. We'll pick up with man. There are two words for man, well, the definition of man being person. One of them gives rise to man, and the other indirectly gives rise to human. It also directly gives rise to gome, which is apparently a word. Man, as opposed to woman, is preserved in the first half of werewolf, and virtue and virile, and some other Latin words. Andro is from this root, which becomes ner in Proto-Germanic. It lowers to nar, but without anything to keep it together. It fronts and ends back up as near. By contrast, if it was forced to be a back vowel, it would end up as nor, as we see in moon. But that was just a segue. Man wouldn't end up like that. Now, there is another word for moon, which gives lunar. This one would be lauchsno in Proto-Germanic. Now, these can combine normally and get lauchs in Proto-West Germanic, but it could also lose the ch and just be lausen, which A commonly happens next to n in Old English, and B makes it by analogy to luna in Slavic and Latin. Additionally, it also makes it by analogy to mousen from 2 videos ago, which meant fly. Now, I actually got the vowel wrong for this one. It turns out ow doesn't contract into ah and merge with I. It contracts into ah and breaks up into alla. So the word for fly would be miesen, and the word for moon is lesen. Mother is accurate, so is night, so is name, so is nail, with an extension, so is nose, so is ear. Salt is accurate, sand is accurate. I could rush through these much quicker, but I want them time to be on screen. Star is accurate, father is accurate. Smoke is from the word tuhmos, which is cognate with fumes and thymus. In Proto-Germanic, this would be dumage. A mutation doesn't affect long vowels, but it still could be lowered by analogy to doom. Failing that, it would end up as English down. The English word for mouth is from to chew, and an alternative word for it is has. This actually evolved into the Germanic osage, which is only found in North Germanic. In English, we received a Werner's Law variant that would become or. The original would descend into us, or more likely it would become os, potentially by merging with ansage, but I don't know what words we're expecting to make it into Old English. Seed, like name and child from last video, is a m stem that was forced to be an an stem. This was Proto-Germanic samo, which predictably became Proto-West Germanic samo after long e lowers. Since there's a back vowel, this can't brighten into ash. It remains as long a and raises into long o in Middle English. From there, it could be spelt like loam or like home. Since some is already a word, I'm going to spell it as soam. Rope is derived from the PIE word for rope. Derived poorly, that is. This word is hroipnos. En route to Proto-Germanic, we completely ignore Grimm's law and delete this n, yielding reipage. Other than that, it's completely fine. Now, you may argue that you could just say it's from a Proto-Indo-European hroibos, and everything would be fine. But no road exists here except for the ones that do, so we're just going to go with it. In Proto-Germanic, this should regularly become raivnaj, and the vowel evolved the same, but with vn instead of p. The Proto-Germanic form of sun is weird and involved a lot of extensions. The original root for sun, however, ended in Slavic ul. There are a couple of things to do with this, but they'll ultimately result in replacing it or adding on to it. I'm feeling generous, so we'll go with sohulos. This bit either shortens or contracts into a monophthong like we saw with fire, which I think could be a long O or U. I'll go with the short version for this word, which gives us saulage. Predictably, this breaks and lengthens and ends up as seal. The word for day is related to din and dia. Except, is it? It's not. They're from to shine, and this word, which refers to the daytime sky, is only preserved in English as the T in the word Lent. If it wasn't merged and shrunken down, it would give us Tyne, possibly spelt like the river. Now, this root is also what gives us Zeus, as well as a bunch of other important Indo-European sky gods, so it's probably also worth it to look at how that would end up. Yes, technically we have Tyr, but that's a different stem. Now, the cluster dia is pretty unique in Proto-Indo-European. I'm not sure what it would end up as. The two best options I can think of are s after Grimm's law or t after combining the vowels. So that becomes saus, though Proto-Germanic only has one size of diphthong. Old English does have long diphthongs, and this is one of them, becoming saus and English cease. The word for cloud originally meant a clump of rocks, and the Proto-European root was nepos, and it, or at least an extension of it, nepelos, made it to Proto-Germanic as nivilage. This is preserved in English as Niflheimer via Old Norse, the realm of the frost giants. It also made it to Old English as nivul. Like devil, this vowel isn't lengthened and instead becomes English nivul. The word for heaven is also originally meant a clump of rocks. In theory, this root made it twice into Germanic, though both times it was metathesized and the ch ended up out in front. If we stick with achmo, we get Proto-Germanic achmo, which becomes Old English achma. This disappears, lengthens the preceding vowel, and the long A raises the long O, so we get ohm. This time I'll spell it like home. Water has a couple of words. One was last week's word for river, the other is water, and one refers to a water spirit, which eventually became ape. Wart is from the word for a root, and so is root via Old Norse, and tooth is from one of the two words for tooth, the other is comb. And that's nouns. Let's move into adjectives, for which it is harder to find photos to represent. Evil and small are both acceptable descendants of the word bad in Proto-Indo-European, so is tor, which is a very obsolete word, but could easily be reinforced by the past tense of to tear. Much more and most are all descended from the PIE word for big, though this vowel is somehow swapping out for oo. I think it's easier to expect Mitch. Cold is accurate, though I do find it funny that both syllables here are affected by Werner's law. The word for correct is cognate with veritas in Latin, and it arrived as Old English ware, which would be English where. Swart, an out-of-fashion word for black, is from the PIE for dirty. Thirst is from the PIE for dry. Dull is accurate, and full is accurate. There are generally three words for good. One gives better and best, as well as batten and to boot. The other are su and hues, which are probably related. Now, the Gothic word for better is iusiza, which we could expect via metathesis of huesiso to hausiso. That would be Proto-Germanic eusiro. Now, that's the comparative form. The regular form would instead be the yasem eusiage. You following me? That would harmonize to eusia, which then umlauts to use, and finally ends up as English eyes, although the same vowel occurred in steel, so maybe ease. The Proto-Indo-European word for heavy is grehus. The zero-grade version of this becomes kuruj in Proto-Germanic, which is only attested in Gothic. There are a couple of ways this can go. Kuruj on its own doesn't really have too many good analogies. The closest I could find was fur, and the presence of a front vowel could indicate chur, although cur seems more appropriate. The E-grade version of it has the same cluster as neck, so I'll treat it the same way and make it Proto-Germanic pror. Again, we have O, which did exist in one word, 8, but that's unstressed and so probably different. When stressed, I'll probably just combine it into pros. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Anyway, yeah, that becomes prus, although praus is more tempting in this case. There are two words connected to left in Proto-European. One is lehios, which is found across ancient Greek, Latin, and Slavic. Now, there are a lot more words containing oi, usually split across multiple syllables, so this is going to be loiwar. There's kind of a lot going on here. I have two main possibilities. One, these remaining in separate syllables, this umlauts to this breaks and descends into o, and it all merges together as li. That's the boring option. The exciting option starts with these being in the same syllable, and then they sort of merge or metathesize, with this becoming some sort of or o in early Old English. With that in mind, the w never disappears, so when this segment smooths and unrounds, it becomes the diphthong o for a lu in modern English. There's also selios, which has a much more boring journey to seliage, breaking to seliage, umlaut to siu, and becomes sigh. Long is accurate. Anger and angst via German are all descended from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to narrow or just narrow. Red is accurate. Yellow is accurate. Right is from a word that originally meant straight. Merry is from a word that originally meant short. Glad is from a word that originally meant smooth. Thick is accurate, and so is thin. Foul is good for rotten. The word for old is senos, which is extended to be siniage by Proto-Germanic. Unless umlaut magically lengthens this vowel or the length passes backwards, we would get sini. I have to disagree with siny in any case, just because it feels wrong, and unironically, that's enough. The original word for right is related to dexterity, which arrived in Proto-Germanic as texwo. The ending would drop off, leaving the w to fend for itself, while the folds up into an e the same way it did with 6, leaving tix. The word word for sharp is the same root that was used in stone, and it's remarkably consistent across the proto-languages. Assuming Germanic doesn't do anything stupid, it would be received as achraj, which loses the ch and lengthens, becoming or in modern English. One of the words for hot allegedly becomes warm, but another one is only received via Latin as tepid. This root is technically a verb that means to be warm, but the vrdi gerundative should solve that problem. Lengthen the vowel e-stem ending. The term thebona was actually attested in Germanic, so that would be the adjective thebij. This lowers to a long a in early modern English, but then it just umlauts back to an a, and we end up with thieve in modern English. And that leaves the verbs for next week. No, even I realize that's too much. Give me a break and let me make a video about, like, scorpion flies or something. Skeet, skeet, mother...